You know the deal. Pay up! Those were the first words the officer barked, loud enough to snap necks across the plaza and freeze the lunchtime chatter. His voice cracked through the warm afternoon air like a whip, and for a moment the only other sound was the hiss of steam rising from the vendor's cart. The vendor, stocky, calm, wearing a navy apron and a clipped-on digital thermometer, didn't flinch. He simply looked at the officer, eyes steady, as if he had been waiting for this moment. He had. What the uniformed cop didn't know, what no one in the crowd knew, was that the vendor wasn't just a vendor. He was a federal marshal, working undercover on an investigation that had been building for months. But the officer didn't know that. He only knew what he thought he saw. A black street vendor, alone, surrounded by customers and cameras, easy to intimidate. And so he stepped closer, baton lifted. The city plaza at noon was always the same. Business people grabbing hot dogs and tacos, teenagers filming everything on their phones, food carts lined up like soldiers along the concrete stretch. Among them was the shiny metal hot dog cart the marshal had been using as his cover. To most people, he looked like any other vendor. Friendly, quick with jokes, apron smeared with mustard by noon. But behind the apron was a badge tucked deep in a false pocket, a wire running beneath his shirt, and a mission. For months, the department's Internal Affairs Division had been receiving anonymous reports of a small group of officers running a street tax racket. Vendors, particularly minority vendors, were being shaken down for cash in exchange for protection. Those who resisted saw permits disappear, carts vandalized, or citations mysteriously multiply. No one wanted to talk. The officers had power. The vendors didn't. So the marshal volunteered. A different agency, a different jurisdiction, a clean outsider. And slowly he gathered evidence. Small interactions, quiet threats, the same officers appearing at the same times. And today, the leader of the little ring, the loudest, most aggressive one, had finally walked into the trap. "You know the deal! Pay up!" The officer snarled again, stepping so close the marshal could smell the bitter coffee on his breath. The officer wasn't alone. Another uniform stood behind him, hands clasped tightly around a wad of bills, today's collection. Several passers-by noticed the tension and slowed their steps, phones lifting as instinctively as breathing. The marshal forced a tired sigh, playing his role. "I already told you," he said. "Business was slow today. I don't have—" Before he could finish, the officer shoved the baton against his chest. "You think I'm joking? You're short. That means you're disrespecting me." The marshal kept his expression carefully composed, enough fear to look convincing, but not enough to escalate the situation too quickly. "You want protection or not?" the officer barked. "Because accidents happen. Stoves catch fire. Permits disappear. Carts get tipped over." A few customers gasped. One of the men in the back muttered, "Damn," while filming. The marshal glanced at the second officer. He wasn't even pretending to hide his grin. They thought they had him cornered. They didn't know Internal Affairs agents were stationed around the plaza disguised as joggers, tourists, and office workers. They didn't know 2 unmarked cars were waiting just outside the pedestrian zone. They didn't know that the mic taped under the marshal's apron had picked up everything. And most of all, they didn't know he wasn't alone. The first officer leaned in. Last chance. He jabbed the baton again, this time harder, enough to make the crowd murmur, enough that several phones were now recording in clear sight. The marshal inhaled slowly, letting the burner phone in his pocket vibrate, an incoming signal from the surveillance team. "Hand over the cash," the officer demanded. Then he made his mistake. He reached for the pocket of the marshal's apron. The marshal stepped back sharply. Not aggressively, just enough to protect the wire, enough to make the officer commit. "Don't move!" the officer barked, quickly replacing the baton with his hand on his gun. Now the crowd was no longer murmuring. They were reacting, voices rising, a few shouting, "Hey! And what are you doing?" Phones were everywhere. This was it. The marshal's voice stayed steady. "Officer, I suggest you remove your hand from your weapon." "Oh, now you want to give me orders?" The officer scoffed. "You must be crazy." The marshal breathed once deeply, then he reached into his apron pocket. The officer stiffened, hand tightening on his holster. But the marshal didn't pull out a wallet, or the day's cash, or anything remotely threatening. Instead, he withdrew a slim leather badge case. He flipped it open, and the world went silent. The officer blinked. "What the hell is that supposed to be?" The marshal straightened, voice no longer meek and no longer acting. "United States Marshal Service," he said clearly. "You and your partner are under arrest for extortion, racketeering, and misuse of authority." The officer laughed, a short, shocked bark that quickly faded when he realized the bystanders weren't laughing with him. Instead, they were staring behind him. Because suddenly, officers were everywhere. Not his officers. Real officers. Internal affairs badges, federal windbreakers, tactical vests, unmarked vehicles rolling into the plaza, plainclothes agents closing in through the crowd with purposeful steps. The second officer, the one holding the cash, dropped the wad of bills as if they were burning coals. He took one step back before two IA agents already had him by the arms. The first officer reached for his gun. He didn't get anywhere close. Two marshals ducked in from either side, pinning his arms while another kicked the holster back. The baton clattered across the pavement as the marshal, still wearing his apron, stepped forward. "You really should have walked away today," he said quietly. The officer stared at him, red-faced, stunned. You set me up?" "I collected evidence," the marshal corrected. "You wrote the rest of the story yourself." As the officers were cuffed and read their rights, a dozen bystanders began clapping. Not polite claps, loud, emphatic applause that echoed across the plaza. One man shouted, "About time someone stopped you!" A woman near the hot dog cart said, "We saw you last week harassing that tamale lady." Several others stepped forward, volunteering statements, eager to finally speak now that the badge protecting the extortionists had been stripped away. Phones captured everything. For once, the cops weren't the ones controlling the narrative. The plaza slowly returned to normal, though people kept glancing toward the hot dog cart as if its owner might suddenly sprout wings. The marshal didn't. He simply loosened his apron and leaned against the cart, letting the adrenaline settle. His handler approached, smiling. "Textbook," she said. "We got everything. Clean, airtight case." "You should try the chili dog," he replied. "That's the real victory." She snorted. "We'll add it to the case file." As the suspects were loaded into separate vehicles, the first officer twisted to look at the marshal one last time. "You think you're a hero?" he spat. "No," the marshal said. "I think I did my job." The door slammed shut, and just like that, the plaza felt lighter, like a shadow had been lifted that most people never noticed was there. A few vendors from nearby carts approached the marshal. "You really a Fed?" one asked. He nodded. "And those cops? They're gone? For real?" "They're done," he assured them. "And if anyone else tries something like this, you call the number I'm going to give you." A heavy silence settled among them, relief mixed with the exhaustion of people who had endured far more than they ever should have. "Thank you," another vendor said quietly. "We didn't think anyone cared." "Well," the marshal said, removing the apron completely, "now you know someone does." Later, after the sworn statements were gathered and the plaza returned to its normal lunchtime chaos, the marshal closed the lid of the hot dog cart for the last time. His undercover assignment was over. But as he walked away, he heard a voice call out, "Hey! Marshal!" He turned. It was one of the street vendors, a young guy with a small taco stand. "You ever want to come back?" the guy said. "I'll give you free tacos for life." The marshal grinned. "I might take you up on that." He walked off into the crowd, badge now visible on his belt, the afternoon sun glinting off it. A plaza that had once feared the wrong kind of police presence now applauded the right kind. And somewhere inside a precinct office, a very uncomfortable conversation was happening about oversight, accountability, and how much damage one corrupt officer can do before someone finally stands up to him. Because today, someone did. And for the first time in a long time, the vendors felt safe. Not because a cop demanded protection money, but because a marshal had given them real protection instead. If you enjoyed this story and want more powerful, real-life inspired narratives like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Like the video to support the channel. Comment below what story you want next, and don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Your support helps these stories keep coming. Thank you.